Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville, fiber internet, streaming TV, home security, and automation in southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR GRODNER attorneys providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis, lawmg.com. The IU School of Education preparing teachers, scholars, and administrators to improve teaching in Indiana and around the world. education.indiana.edu. IU Alumni Association connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. The FBI says human trafficking is the fastest growing crime in the world. Healthcare workers have a large role to play in getting victims resources, but it's not that simple.
Okay, great, like you can tick a box, I identified somebody, but like seriously, then what? Who's your law enforcement partner? Who's your service providers you're referring to?
Ahead, human trafficking experts launch new webinar training for physicians and nurses. Indiana's top education official announced she won't be seeking a second term. We sit down with education reporter Jeanie Lindsay about what this means for the rest of her term and her successor. And one Hoosier had a simple question: what to do with old weed killer. We went behind the scenes at a hazardous waste facility to see how they're handled. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. More cases of human trafficking are being identified across the country each year, including in Indiana. Hospitals and medical professionals can play a large role in tackling the issue. Lindsay Wright is here with more.
That's right, Joe, they can, but it's not an easy task. Hospitals face a number of challenges when it comes to confronting issues with human trafficking. Doctors, nurses, they're strapped for time. That's why experts are implementing what they say is a more comprehensive way to get those professionals the training they need.
Robin Uberta is a forensic nurse examiner for Community Health Network in Indianapolis. She sees patients who come into the emergency department and may have injuries because of abuse, neglect, or violence. Those patients come here to the Center of Hope.
Nurses are the most trusted profession, so I'm always surprised at how much patients open up to me so quickly.
Uberta says sometimes patients just want support. Other times, they might want a sexual assault kit done or their injuries photographed.
This is to look for body secretions. So I don't know if you can see. Can you see the illumination? Yeah. So right there's the.
Yeah, there's the spot.
She sees all types of patients, including those who are victims of human trafficking.
We have a really unique role in healthcare that at some point these trafficked victims are going to need some type of medical treatment from a physician, whether it's to get antibiotics or to get on birth control or get pain medications or need a suture or something like that.
Uberta says simply recognizing a patient is being trafficked is difficult. They don't always know they're being trafficked, and their trafficker could be a significant other or even family member. But identifying cases is critical. According to the nonprofit anti-trafficking group Polaris Project, hospitals are the third point of access for those experiencing trafficking. So getting healthcare workers the training they need is key.
And it's not just physicians and nurses, it's security, it's the intake people, the triage people. Every point in that healthcare system, someone would be able to recognize if they're trained properly.
There are barriers in making that happen, though. Kate Kimmer works with the Indiana Coalition to End Sexual Assault. She says there's a lot that goes into training healthcare workers, not just teaching them to notice the red flags.
Okay, great, like you can tick a box, I identified somebody, but like seriously, then what? Who's your law enforcement partner? Who's your service providers you're referring to? How can you get that person help if they want it, right? I mean, that's a kind of a bigger part of the conversation than just identifying.
And the next challenge is time. Healthcare providers are busy, so locking them into a comprehensive training seminar isn't easy. Members of an anti-trafficking task force are launching a 90-minute webinar training video that hospitals can use to help their employees get the information they need and at a time that works for them.
That would be kind of that general call out that people could watch anytime and check their knowledge, make sure they know their knowledge, and would have access immediately to certain referral pathways and resources within the state of Indiana.
When we talk about domestic violence,
the video includes information about trafficking laws and red flags, and it also breaks down the stereotypical illustration of human trafficking.
In general, we are not going to see human trafficking victims come into our healthcare settings in shackles.
Officials say the webinar will ease the strain on current trainers, too.
Our IPATH roles are very dear to us, but it's a volunteer capacity, and so we all have full-time jobs. So we can't, that's a barrier that we faced, is having enough trainers to go out and do the training.
The webinar can be used in facilities statewide. Uberta says it's a step in the right direction. She says after some community staff members received training, they identified more than a dozen victims in 2017.
We need to talk about how it impacts our community and how these people are coming through our hospitals and how we can make a huge difference with protecting them. They're no different than any other type of victim of violence that we dedicate our time to.
Interesting story, Lindsay. So now the doctors and so forth go through and do the webinar, but then what happens?
Then they can request more training. So someone with the IPATH task force would go in and work with certain people from the hospitals. Then those folks would work with other people in the hospital. They call it train the trainer. And the goal is for hospitals to really own it, to make it their own thing. They think it'll be a more comprehensive, sustainable way for hospitals to train folks and to kind of get on the same page.
What are some of the other barriers that they face besides just the training part of this?
Well, Robin Uberta says she thinks one of the biggest barriers is getting executive leadership fully on board with this, recognizing that human trafficking is an issue. But she did say community health, for example, is working to require staff participate in training efforts. Another challenge is the lack of data. This is a hard thing to track. So now IPATH will ask hospitals with this new system of training to collect data on identified cases. They want to know what's working, what's not working.
And we're just talking about healthcare right now. We know there are a lot more. Is there something that the state is doing to help out?
Yeah, so one idea that the legislature is kind of tossing around is whether a single state agency for adult victims of trafficking is needed. So a single point of access. And I attended a study committee a few weeks ago that touched on that topic. It would be kind of like the Department of Child Services for kids, but adults. And you know, some people said it's all over the place. They don't really know where to go for resources. Maybe a single point would help. But Kate Kimmer says this is just a no-go. She says organizations like IPATH, they're already doing these things. They've created a network of tons of organizations across the state that are working on efforts against human trafficking. So she straight up said to lawmakers, don't reinvent the wheel. Maybe give us funding so we can do the job better.
All right, Lindsay, thank you very much. Now for headlines, we go over to Barbara Brosier, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. Hoosiers have another few days to get registered to vote ahead of November's elections. October 9th is the last day residents can register. You can do so by texting Indiana to 2VOTE or online at indianavoters.com. You can also submit an application in person at your local county clerk's office. An Indiana University professor who lived in the same dorm as Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh says he doesn't think the FBI's investigation into sexual misconduct allegations against the judge was thorough. He and Kavanaugh lived in the dorm where one of the incidents allegedly took place, so he called the FBI Saturday with a list of people who could be helpful, but he never got a response.
I think the most important thing is when people say a thorough investigation was done, people need to know that is not the case. That has not happened, because a thorough investigation would have meant covering the basics, and the basics were not covered.
He says information some classmates have contradicts testimony Kavanaugh gave to the Senate Judiciary Committee about his conduct at Yale. The final vote on Kavanaugh's nomination is expected this weekend. Indiana University's School of Global and International Studies now bears the name of two of Indiana's longest-serving public servants. IU announced this week the school will now be called the Lee H. Hamilton and Richard G. Lugar School of Global International Studies, in honor of the former congressman and former senator. Hamilton says he's thrilled to have his name associated with the school, which he thinks plays an important role in shaping the future.
These challenges come at us with great rapidity and complexity. And knowing that this school is going to help meet those challenges in the best possible way.
Lugar stressed the importance of America's ongoing role to provide equality of opportunity and individual liberty to places around the globe. The announcement also kicks off a $25 million fundraising campaign to establish a scholarship program and endowed faculty positions at the school. The federal government will spend $320,000 cleaning up a toxic plume coming from the site of a former gas station partially owned by Vice President Mike Pence's family. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency says the underground solvent cloud threatens drinking water in an area just south of Columbus. The plume was traced to the site of a former Keel Brothers gas station. Mike Pence's father and brother served in leadership roles at the business. Indiana officials initially found the company responsible, but reversed that finding in 2002. U.S. Senator Todd Young is backing a bill that would require the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to inspect lead pipes in low-income housing. The bill would also create a grant program to help communities address lead in drinking water in public spaces. The legislation has bipartisan support, and Young says he's confident the bill will be signed into law in the coming months. Indiana's governor says bringing new industry to the state's towns will ensure the future economic vitality of Indiana. Governor Holcomb was a guest this week at a convention of mayors and city officials called AIM, or Accelerating Indiana's Municipalities in French Lick.
We have to make sure that you have safe streets and good schools, all the basics. But then in addition to that, people are looking for cool places to live. We know that population scarcity is one of the biggest threats that we face as a state.
Holcomb says investments in infrastructure, including rural internet connectivity and international outreach at the Indianapolis airport, are necessary for the economic future of the state. Both of those programs are part of the $1 billion Next Level initiatives he announced earlier this summer. Well, electric scooter sharing services came to Bloomington less than a month ago, and Indiana University's already impounded at least 150 of them. People are leaving a large number of the Bird and Lime scooters in the middle of the street or sidewalk.
We want to keep them out and available for use, but we also want to impart to the companies that we're taking a serious approach to making sure that the needs and the safety of our students is first and foremost.
Parking Operations stores the scooters and notifies the company they belong to, which must then pay a fine for the scooter's release. The university tries to avoid impounding the scooters by moving them to nearby bike racks when possible. And man, Joe, those things go fast, up to 17 miles an hour.
Wow, and they're obvious they're around, but this is something that cities are going to have to grapple with is how do you take care of them?
Yes, a lot are trying to decide if they want to pass regulations.
Barbara, thank you very much. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Vigo County officials have spent years debating a new jail. They could finally be close to picking a spot to build it, but opposition is mounting. And a visit to a museum that's showcasing a collection of extravagant coffins designed to celebrate the deceased. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, Where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing
for insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the
Senate. You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Controversy is once again brewing over a proposed site for a new Vigo County jail. As Alex Eady reports, some county leaders are reconsidering building the facility on the former International Paper property in Terre Haute.
Vigo County is facing multiple lawsuits because of overcrowding at its jail. And for years, local leaders have considered building a new facility to alleviate the problem. But previous plans stalled because of issues with funding and finding a location. County commissioners announced this week they're considering the former International Paper site on Prairieton Road in Terre Haute for the jail. They proposed the same location last year, but tabled the idea after zoning conflicts and pushback from the public. Commissioners say they're reconsidering the 64-acre site because of its close proximity to the courthouse, which cuts down on travel time while transporting inmates.
If we put it too far south, we have deputies way up in the north end. It would take them forever to get down. So we're trying to take all that into consideration. And in doing that, this is the best place.
But some taxpayers are concerned the jail will be a burden to nearby property owners. Pat Goodwin is the president of the Vigo County Taxpayers Association and a Terre Haute mayoral candidate. He says he feels the county hasn't been transparent with the public.
That means putting all the options out on the table and having public meetings where you actually let the citizens see the process of selection and look at all the factors at once. And we just haven't seen that in this case.
Goodwin says there are more appropriate property options that are both affordable and centrally located. But Anderson says taking advantage of the site on Prairieton Road is the best, most cost-effective option.
It's the most sensible thing to do for the taxpayers, whether they realize it or not.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Alex Eady.
The county commissioners have requested a zoning variance for the proposed site, and the Board of Zoning Appeals will consider the request in November. The commissioners will still need to get a builder's permit before they can start work on the jail. Indiana State Superintendent of Public Instruction Jennifer McCormick dropped a bombshell announcement this week that she won't be running for re-election. Our education reporter Jeanie Lindsay joins us to talk about why McCormick made this move and what it means for Indiana. Now, you were there.
Yeah.
Were you surprised too, like everybody else?
The whole room was pretty surprised. She was very subtle in how she brought it up. She's done with the governance structure. The way that it's set up in Indiana, she was telling us, is really complicated. So the Department of Education is largely responsible for implementing policies set by the state board and lawmakers. And she says that makes it hard to, get the needs from the field, so schools and educators really communicated with the state to make some meaningful impact. And she says she wants to do that and doesn't think she can do that in this position moving forward.
So why is this second term announcement such a big deal?
So when lawmakers were in the 2017 session, it was her first session in the office, and she was entering the position after a lot of infighting by previous administrations. A lot of tension was there, and so lawmakers decided to make the superintendent position one appointed by the governor. And the way they had the law written, that would go into effect in 2025 because they in part wanted to give her room to run for a second term. But with this decision, lawmakers are already talking about bumping that timeline up. So the next person who heads the Department of Education could be an education secretary appointed by the governor.
Now, she still has 2 years left in office, right?
Yeah.
So now how will this impact these next 2 years?
So the superintendent also has the responsibility or the position of chairing the State Board of Education. And with this announcement, she's decided also not to chair the State Board of Ed. So really, it seems right now that she's kind of clearing her plate. She'll have a lot of room to just focus on her agenda. Her 2019 agenda is a pretty aggressive one. And so she'll just have more room to focus on her work and not have what she calls some unnecessary distractions moving forward before she leaves in 2020.
We have like 15 seconds. Anything about the 2019 that she mentioned that you want to?
Yeah, so it's going to be a budget session, so funding is going to be on the table. She's looking for more money for STEM. She's supportive of, expansions for pre-K. Special ed funding is something that's come up, and she also wants to see just overall increases in tuition support from the state.
Jeanie, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
We believe great journalism starts with great questions, so we're answering yours. Our next question comes from our Inquire Indiana series. It comes from a viewer who wants to know more about what happens to household pesticides.
Eric Rensberger of Bloomington wanted to know how to dispose of some leftover Roundup pesticide he had in his basement.
I wanted to get rid of it, and I thought, oh, but you can't just dump it on the ground.
So, what do you do with leftover Roundup? The short answer is you take it to your local hazardous waste facility, which for Rensberger is here, Monroe County Hazardous Materials. But Rensberger had other questions.
I would love to know what they do with it, how they dispose of it properly.
And how do workers stay safe when they handle the Roundup? To answer these questions, Rensberger and WTIU went to the hazardous waste facility.
The biggest thing we take in terms of volume and commonality is paint. Paint, electronics, household cleaners, pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, all those kinds of things. So a lot of things you're going to find in your garage, in your under your sink.
Morgan says when people drop off their leftover pesticides, they first have to fill out a form.
And then we're going to take it back here to a scale and weigh it so that we can quantify numerically how much we're diverting from a landfill.
If it's still able to be used and safe, it would go on this shelf, where Monroe County residents can pick it up for free. If not, the whole sealed container goes in one of these lined 55-gallon steel drums. Once that drum is full, Morgan says, it gets shipped to Indianapolis and eventually ends up at a facility in East Liverpool, Ohio, where it gets incinerated.
And the reason they do incineration versus landfilling is because once you burn it, your liability and your hazard goes away.
Morgan says the entire steel drum gets chucked in the incinerator.
They're able to pull that metal back and still recycle it after they're done.
To Rensberger, this all sounds pretty hazardous for employees.
These people have to handle this and all kinds of other things. What precautions do they take? And do you ever have to talk to employees about their own safety or their own concerns about the kind of materials they're handling?
Morgan says the Monroe County hazardous waste staff goes through training every year.
Complacency does happen on occasion, I'm sure, but it's something that we really try to pay attention to and help each other. Say, hey, don't forget to put your gloves on. What about your glasses? If safety boots are forgotten, hey, don't forget to go put your safety boots on, those types of things. So we really try to help each other remember to do things safely so that you go home to your family.
Morgan says the staff also gets yearly blood and urine screenings.
We do about 6 or 7 vials of blood where they're checking heavy metals, everything possible where if we have an exposure in here, they're going to medically see that, then they can treat that based on what they see.
Rensberger says visiting the hazardous waste facility helped to answer his questions.
I had a wonderful time. I had a great field trip.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
We want to explore the questions you have about Indiana, and you could even be part of the process as we find the answers. What about the Hoosier State, its culture, or people do you want us to explore? Just go to WTIU.org/InquireIndiana and let us know. The Mathers Museum in Bloomington is hosting a selection of coffins from Ghana that are much different than you're probably used to seeing. They're called fantasy coffins, and they're personalized to each person. That means they are complex and colorful, depicting everything from basketballs to tomatoes.
They're made in shapes that maybe represent that person's occupation, so a fish for a fisherman to honor their life's work. It could also be a shape that is relevant to the family, like there's family symbols such as a lion. Once it was required that you bury someone in a cemetery, and once it was required that you use a mortuary, the Ga people wanted to make very public statements about their ancestors. It's sort of an intuitive sense of the size and the shape that these coffins should be in. That's why they train for sometimes 8 to 10 years in order to be able to master coffin maker. They'll frame it and then they'll fill in all the pieces with planks of wood. And then once that everything's filled in, they'll put putty on top of the surface of the coffin after it's sort of sanded down. They'll put putty on top, sand down the putty until it becomes a smooth surface that then they can paint on top of. For a while, it was sort of trendy for a rich person to be buried in a Mercedes-Benz shaped coffin. So it would just show off their wealth, and sometimes they'd have their car, next to the car coffin at the funeral. People start to realize that what they're doing here is something that we already do with our deceased people as well. We all want to honor the person that's died in some way, and so this is one of the ways that the God people manifest that, is to make these coffins.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber, the Gigacity Company, fiber internet, HD, and digital IPTV in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR GRODNER Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis, lawmg.com. The IU School of Education, preparing teachers, scholars, and administrators to improve teaching in Indiana and around the world. education.indiana.edu. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.